Breathe in and let the room dim. Over your ceiling of black, the 12 glittering witnesses hang like a court that never adjourned. They look kind, but every star was once a consequence. The Zodiac is not a carousel of cute traits, it is a case file. Old crimes written in light so we never forget what desire and fear can do when they put on crowns. Start where spring cuts open the year. The ram that runs before the world. Aries is not a mascot, it is a rescue that cost almost everything. A city made itself sick with a lie, grain withering because someone whispered it should. A knife was sharpened for a life that didn't deserve it. At the brink, altar smoke, the taste of metal, something gold and breathing burst from the tree line. A ram with a hide like sunrise and a voice that sounded like refusal. The victim climbed onto that living fire and vanished into sky salt, fingers clutching wool as if sunlight were a handle. Over the strait, the wind raised its own teeth. One pair of hands let go, the sea took the name. The other pair, stiff with terror and hope, made it to a far shore where gratitude hardened into ritual. The ram was thanked by being taken apart, its shining pelt nailed high in a foreign grove, guarded forever by sleepless teeth and a story that would one day pull a ship of desperate men into harm's mouth. Only then did the constellation appear, Aries, preserved because it refused to look away when everyone else did. That is your first meaning, the part of you that rages forward, insisting there must be a way out. Aries is the alarm that wakes the house. It rescues with speed because a slower virtue might arrive with flowers and apologies after the loss. But the light has a bruise in it. Impulse saves and scars. The same surge that throws you across the strait can throw someone else into it. The ram's fleece became a prize men would kill to polish. The saviour became pretext. Every spring, Aries asks the same blunt question. Do you want glory or do you want the life? Choose correctly and the knife drops. Choose badly and a different kind of hunger takes over and calls itself fate. The second file opens on a shoreline where the air tastes of oranges and salt. A white bull stands in the surf with eyes too human. Breath warm, muscles easy as sleep. The trick of Taurus is comfort. It lowers its head, invites a hand to its brow, lets laughter muddy the first warning in the blood. You climb on because gentleness, when it is perfect, feels like permission. The sea answers with a long intake. The bull steps deeper. Sand gives way to green. A father's shout is a gull tearing at the sky. And then there is only distance and a back broad enough to carry a continent's future. The swimmer is not a swimmer. It is Zeus smiling through an animal's face on the island where the bull's hooves finally ring on stone. The abduction blooms into a dynasty and a debt. King will promise a god a sacrifice and keep the best for himself. Oceans do not forget that kind of arithmetic. The punishment is not lightning. It is appetite bent out of shape until even the royal house cannot look at its table without flinching. Desire is twisted into a machine, and from that machine a problem is born with a man's body and a head shaped like the excuse that made him. To hide shame, a labyrinth rises, beautiful, engineered, and devoted to feeding itself on whatever the city will give. Each year blood is led down corridors where it echoes like prayers answered by stone. Each year, the king tells himself he is still in charge. Taurus, placed in the sky for the bull that stole ashore, is the sign of possession and of what possession costs. It is strength yoked to appetite, patience that can either build a granary or build a maze. It is wealth that keeps a household safe through winter, or wealth that turns a household into a vault where no one breathes. The bull is stubborn because it believes it must be. It is tender because it can be. It is dangerous because it forgets the difference. When Theseus finally threads the halls and ends the thing at the centre, he does it not with a sword alone, but with a slender line given by a mind that loved the world more than her father's pride. This is Taurus's shadow antidote, devotion that unties knots, a cord through dark turns, a promise that says, I will not let you be eaten by what you built. Aries and Taurus, fire that will not wait, earth that will not move, stand next to each other for a reason. One begins, one sustains, one breaks cages, one accidentally invents them. One leaps into the unknown with the unarguable logic of breath. The other anchors so hard the floorboards creak and call it responsibility. Together they teach a first necessary disquiet. Rescue is not the end. Arrival is not innocence. A golden escape becomes a trophy. A gentle ride becomes a kidnapping. A proud city becomes a pantry for its secrets. Look up again. The ram burns forward. The bull lowers its head and turns the sky like a millstone. In their light, you can see the ordinary versions of their myths, the hasty promise you made to fix everything and the heavy thing you swore to carry alone, the night you fled and the morning you realized you'd brought the maze with you. The constellations don't forgive, they remind. They ask you to be fast without being careless, steadfast without becoming stone. They ask you to check the altar for lies, the pasture for masks, the plan for a door that opens outward. The rest wait their turn, faces carved into the dark, each with a clean symbol and a tangled origin. Twins who aren't as equal as they look. A hunter crowned like a king who forgets he's not. A balance that cuts palms as often as it weighs truth. But for now, let the ram and the bull stand watch at the gate of the year. One keeps the knife from falling, the other keeps the house from eating itself. Between them there is a narrow road that feels like mercy when you find it. Follow that line. The next lights are not a pair by accident, they are a decision disguised as symmetry. Two bodies, two names, one story that never resolves. On every clear night the twins look equal, clean outlines pressed into velvet, mirrored like a coin's faces. But Gemini's file begins in a stable that was really a chessboard. Two brothers who learned young that merit and fate shake hands only when they feel like it. One was hammered from muscle and practice, mortal down to the last breath. The other was poured from something brighter, divine, quick, hard to wound. Castor and Polydeuces they called themselves when they spoke in Greek, but the sea called them by a simpler name, the Dioscuri. The ones who arrive when masts vomit fire and sailors make promises they can't keep. They were inseparable in the loud ways, tournaments, raids, rescues that felt like songs in the making, and in the quiet ones, the way one would reach for a bridle and the other already had the bit, the way arguments stopped when they entered a room side by side. But the earth remembers who it owes, and one day an iron point wrote the bill across a chest that could not refuse it. The mortal fell. The god-brother felt something new, the dizziness of standing while the world refuses to. He went up the mountain and asked a throne for a mercy nobody gets. Make us equal again. Not equal in glory, equal in time. The answer was a compromise only a constellation could love, share the same span by halves. One day in light, one day in the underplaces, a life that alternates, a bond that never sits fully at any table. Gemini is two chairs with one seat warm at a time. Sailors see their candle flames, St. Elmo's fire, cling to rigging before a storm and cheer because they know. Rescue sometimes looks like a visitation that cannot stay long. Castor and Polydeuces keep watch the way all guardians do, by leaving, by returning, by never letting either world claim them wholly. This is the twin signs twist. Gemini's hunger for conversation is not trivial. It is survival. If you live half in light, you learn to trade words the way others trade food. If you live half in shadow, you learn that stories are ropes thrown across wells. The shadow, of course, is choice's bruise. Whose fate do you wear today? What promise did you make when you said always, and discovered always is a verb that demands scheduling. The constellation smiles like a matched set. The myth aches like imbalance turned into a pact. Slide your gaze a little east until a low sideways glow scuttles into view. Cancer isn't a hero. It was never meant to be one. It is a helper who entered a legend without being asked. While a famed labour tore its main monster apart, heads seared shut, steam lifting off swamp water like ghosts, a small creature obeyed a bitter goddess and crept toward the Achilles of the day. Claws lifted. It knew the outcome. It went anyway. The heel crushed. Bones popped. The crab's entire reward for courage was an instant of pressure and a place in the sky. What kind of sign is made from that? The kind that understands scale and still volunteers. Cancer's symbol is not the muscle. It is the shell. The home carried, the edge guarded, the decision to go sideways because frontal glory is a good way to get stepped on. In the sky, the crab is dim. You need darkness and patience to find it. On Earth, its people work like that too. Kitchen lights, ward lights, border lamps, rooms where fever breaks because someone stayed. They pinch when necessary, yes, and retreat without apology when the air goes wrong. The shadow here is the labyrinth you build around what you love. Fortify too well and the rooms become cells. Guard too hard and the tide goes elsewhere to be alive. Behind Cancer's carapace there's another, deeper wrinkle. Hera's thank you wasn't a triumph. It was a memorial. The goddess who sent the crab up also sent it out. This is what loyalty looks like when it isn't rewarded with a feast, steadiness, smallness, a night of being forgotten by anyone who catalogues only the bright. The myth whispers a lesson harder than any spear fight. Your worth is not measured by who notices. The sea still rises because of the moon, not because it wants applause. So the quarter turn of the year sets its own syllogism. Aries breaks you out. Taurus gives you somewhere to land. Gemini splits the check with the underworld. Cancer cooks at odd hours and bars the door when weather goes vertical. Together they sketch the first truth every household and every nation learns. Beginnings cost, security costs, companionship costs, care costs. The lights overhead are receipts. If you want omen, take this. When the twins blaze high, ask whom you're sharing your hours with and what half you've been neglecting while you pretend to be whole. When the crab's faint lanterns come up from the horizon, ask which walls protect and which imprison, which claws guard and which are holding on to hurt because it is familiar. Then listen to the sea's answer, the soft clatter of shells, the sideways shuffle that leaves perfect tracks anyway. Ahead waits a crowned flame, glory with a mane and a roar, and a maiden with grain in her hands and lore in her eyes. The sky is about to talk about pride and harvest, performance and maintenance, but for tonight, let the twins trade places one more time and the crab patrol the tide line it chose for itself. 2 constellations, 2 kinds of promise. I will come back, and I will keep this warm. The crowned flame arrives with a mane and history that doesn't purr. On winter nights, storytellers said the beast was born where storms breed monsters, spawn of the earth's old nightmares in a sky that liked to dare heroes. Its hide drank iron the way sand drinks rain. Arrows slid off and lay on the ground like rejected arguments. Villages along a narrow valley learned to live in whispers. Doors were barred before dusk. Road shrines filled with oil and apologies. The thing in the rocks did not roar to brag. It roared to remind everyone that courage often dies noisily, while terror eats in silence. A certain strong wanderer came with a list of impossible errands and a weariness that looked like purpose. He tried spear, sword, and fire until the night itself laughed. There's a lesson Leo never stops teaching. Some enemies cannot be punctured. They must be understood. He fainted, trapped the beast in a choke of stone and chose to meet it without tools, hands on throat, breath against breath, until the ridge stopped echoing, When the body cooled, the real problem began. You cannot flay invulnerability unless you borrow its language. He did, using claws that cut where bronze failed, and walked out wearing what he had beaten, strength draped in memory. The lion goes to the sky, not as a trophy but as a warning. Leo's shine is glorious, yes, golden, central, the campfire and the crown. But look at the pelt more closely. It is stitched from a night the valley won't forget. This sign's light comes from a bargain with darkness. It demands theatre to keep fear obedient, asks for applause not because vanity is hungry, but because radiance is maintenance. When Leo's healthy, it warms 10 rooms, names others brave and keeps shadows behind the fireline. When it curdles, it builds arenas and calls them homes, hunts praise until love starts to sound like a crowd rehearsed too often, and wears the last victory until it stinks. There's another thread knotted into the mane. The beast learned stealth from a goddess who never forgave easily. Sent as a side glance from a throne that held grudges, it killed with the efficiency of old anger. In that sense, Leo also carries a temper that looks like justice until you check the date on it. The antidote is the same as the hero's technique. Drop the blade, stop performing, grip the problem where it breathes. Authority without intimacy is raw with no kill. Intimacy without authority is a cuddle with teeth. Turn now to the figure carrying grain and keeping the sky honest. Virgo does not arrive with thunder. She arrives with standards. In the first seasons, when the world was still naive enough to believe its own myths of goodness, a bright presence lived among fields and courts, measuring weights by touch and hearts by the way they looked away, or didn't, when a promise was spoken. She brought seed and law, taught furrow and fairness side by side, and showed how bread and verdict rise for the same reasons: patience, heat, proportion. Then came the age when iron learned the taste of blood and people learned how to applaud it. Courts turned into games, scales were bent with rings hidden in sleeves, oaths were taken with tongues tucked against teeth. There's only so much rot a principle can breathe before it turns to air. So the figure with wheat in one hand and a blade of reason in the other stepped back from the dust, lifted, and cooled into constellation. Her leaving felt like harvest without festival. Fields still yielded, but the songs lost their tune. Virgo in the sky is that absence, purity refusing to negotiate with compromise. But on Earth the story kept moving. In one telling she was called Astrea, whose gaze made perjury sweat. In another she wore the patience of Demeter's craft, walking the borders until the calendar itself learned grief and return. In a third, she was Themis's stern kindness, the law that would rather starve than eat what isn't hers. All versions point the same direction: order that does not flatterhunder, expertise that doesn't need a trumpet, care that can say no. Spiker, her star of wheat, glows like a small obligation pinned to the dark. Feed what feeds you. Virgo's shadow starts when that obligation swells into obsession. Perfection arranges the room and forgets to sit down in it. Clean lines turn to fences no one asked for. The scribe who kept record to protect the weak starts keeping record to satisfy an itch nobody else can see. Even her compassion has edges. Too often she tries to fix you by reorganizing you. The darker myths warn exactly here. A loom that wove truth once a year and challenges heaven to a contest and ends up living in corners, spinning silk for survival, transformed not by malice, but by the violence of being right at the wrong volume. There's a softer, stranger caution in Virgo's dossier too. Long ago, a culture welcomed a glittering stranger and learned that gifts can be traps with good manners. A drink sweetened with barley and herbs opened a door to insight and community. The same ritual, in jealous hands, turned into a gatekeeping tool. In or out, saved or suspect. Virgo has to watch her initiations. Teaching can become sorting. Standards can congeal into purity tests that protect nothing except the tester's sense of control. Yet when this sign breathes true, you can taste it. Bread that doesn't crumble, documents that save lives because a comma is where it should be, fields designed for drought and flood both, clinics that run on time without cruelty, friendships that hold you to your best wording instead of your most dramatic one. Virgo's kindness is competence. If Leo throws light, Virgo keeps it from setting the curtains on fire. Together they mark a passage in the year and in us, from the heat that gathers a crowd to the cool hand that counts the heads and checks the exits. Leo asks, "Will you step into the open and carry your story like it deserves sunlight?" Virgo asks, "Good. Will you also proofread it? Will you plant next season's page before this one is finished?" One glories, one guarantees. One signs the decree, one enforces the boring part that makes the decree real. Listen for their shadows in your own pulse. The urge to be seen that forgets to see. The urge to perfect that forgets why perfection was wanted. The old lion within that learns to perform its nobility while neglecting the quiet hunt called follow-through. The inner maiden who polishes the scales so hard she mistakes shine for justice. And then listen for their medicine. If you are blazing, borrow her ledger. If you are editing yourself into exhaustion, borrow his sun. Be the pelt and the pen, the roar and the recipe. When pride makes the room hotter than necessary, cool it with standards. When standards freeze the room, light the fire and invite everyone back in. Look up once more. The lion sprawls across the dark with a paw on your heartbeat. The maiden holds wheat like a promise and a warning. Between them, you can hear a city being born correctly. Amphitheatre and aqueduct, anthem and bylaws. What follows will weigh what they've built. A set of scales that cuts and heals, a scorpion that knows where venom belongs, an archer who believes distance is honesty. But tonight, let the crowned flame keep watch on the walls, while the keeper of grain checks the locks and leaves a lamp in the window. Warmth with boundaries, brightness with standards. That's how a year survives itself. Autumn evens the sky like a careful hand smoothing a sheet. Day and night meet at the hinge and agree to share the hours exactly. That truce has a shape, a beam with two pans hanging in air. Before there were courthouses, there were these lights. Libra is the only sign made of an instrument, and its backstory isn't gentle. Scales were forged because someone lied well. In the age when harvest carts creaked down stone lanes and granaries smelled of warm barley, a bright presence walked the boundaries with unhurried attention. She had gone by many names. Astraea when she measured promises, Themis when she reminded kings they were borrowers of power, Dyke when she put her finger on a scale to correct a thumb already there. She didn't thunder, she weighed. A contract would be read, two witnesses would nod, she would glance once at the principals. If a brow twitched or an eye slid, she would pause, raise a small brass balance, and drop into one pan a sliver of consequence. The other side rose obediently. Verdicts weren't performances then, they were maintenance, like oiling a hinge. But the city discovered spectacle. Trials began to draw crowds. Orators learned to make emptiness ring. Gifts changed hands in rooms that smelled of resin and figs. Priests started to enjoy the way sunlight found their jewelry at noon. It takes a long time to spoil a sacred thing, and the world did it slowly, with compliments. The judge goddess kept returning, kept adjusting, and finally kept her distance. When she lifted from the dust, she left her tool behind as a lesson nobody could misquote. Libra moved into the sky, not a beast, not a hero, a standard. That's why the sign's beauty cuts. True balance isn't an average. It's an exactness that can make palms bleed if you hold it wrong. Remember Orestes returning to a house where hospitality and murder had swapped masks. The old law said blood answers, blood forever. He obeyed it, then fled through temples with a pack of night women hissing in his ear. On a rock above the sea, a new idea took its first breath. Argument instead of vendetta. 12 equal seats, a tie, and a goddess, no lightning, no spear, breaking the balance in favour of release, then inviting the Furies to become something better than hunger. Guardians of thresholds, keepers of proportion. Libra's origin story is the pivot. Punishment turned into procedure, rage domesticated without being denied. But the scales have a shadow that looks respectable. Fairness can be a costume for fear. You can hold two truths so evenly that you refuse to choose the one that saves a life. You can polish process until mercy can't see itself in the reflection. Ask the losers of famous contests how it felt. Ajax, who held the line until his wrists shook, watching a council vote the shining armour to someone who told the better story. The supplicant who brought everything he owned to an altar and lost to a man who brought less but wore the right face. Libra's weakness is paralysis dressed as principle. Charm applied like lacquer to delay the moment when someone must say enough. Yet when it breathes right, entire cities sleep because someone kept count honestly. Fields are parcelled so winter feels like plan, not judgment. Market weights click true. A hand raised in a crowd means I will hear you, not I will out-argue you. In the constellation you can see Spica, the ear of wheat Virgo held, near the beam's fulcrum, as if the sky were reminding you that law exists to protect bread, not the other way around. Now let the even tone drop. Something venom bright lifts its tail out of the dark. If Libra writes the rules, Scorpio enforces the boundaries, other signs only swear by. Its myth enters sideways in someone else's story the way consequences prefer to arrive. A hunter crowned by praise began to believe his feet could ignore the edges of the map. He said he would kill everything that crawled and flew as if abundance were an insult. The earth heard. Depending on which whisper you trust, either Gaia herself or a goddess of wild places sent a small correction that didn't look like much until it moved. The scorpion walked out of shade like a punctuation mark with legs. It didn't posture. It didn't explain the code of the forest. It simply did the one thing evolution had carved into its tail, make a point that no rhetoric survives. Orion fell. From then on, the sky itself enforced the lesson. When the scorpion rises, the hunter sets. They do not share the stage. Hubris gets the summer. The bill comes due in autumn. There's more coiled in that starfield. Near the scorpion's heart burns Antares, the rival of Ares, bed as a wound you can see from orchards at night. War lurks here, but not the trumpet kind. Scorpio's warfare is surgical. Secrets used like scalpels, debts called in at precise hours, poisons that can also be medicine depending on dose and hand. Consider Asclepius, a healer who learned too much, who reached down and pulled breath back into a body the gods had signed off on. Lightning answered. Some stories say he rose anyway, arm hooked around a serpent, to become the figure some call a 13th sign. Whether or not you count Ophiuchus, the warning stands. Even remedy can inflame the law that keeps borders intact. Scorpio lives at that seam, between cure and trespass, between loyalty and possession, between devotion and control. In human rooms, the sign often arrives as intensity that refuses dilution. It remembers every slight because it refuses to outsource pattern recognition. It loves like a vow and hates like a ledger. Protective, it will dig a tunnel under the world to get you out. Obsessed, it will build a tunnel that only leads back to itself and call the loop destiny. Its patience is notorious. Time to Scorpio is not a river. It is a cistern. Drops accrue. When the moment comes, the release is clean. Sometimes mercy. Sometimes justice. Sometimes a silence that scares louder than shouting. The shadow is fixation, turning pain into identity, truth into ammunition, intimacy into siege. Yet look again at the crab that was canonized for an instant of duty, and you'll see Scorpio's quiet kinship with Cancer. Both are armoured caretakers. The difference is direction. Cancer guards the hearth. Scorpio guards the threshold between what must live and what must not. Think of Medea stirring a cup that looked like a gift and was actually a line in the sand. Of the Erinyes agreeing after Athens taught them new work, to chaperone oaths instead of shredding them. Of Persephone wearing seed's colour and ruling below not as captive but as queen who knows exactly what bargains cost. In all of them, the stinger is restraint turned actionable. Libra and Scorpio sit together in the year for a reason. First comes calibration, then comes consequence. First the beam, then the barb. Together they govern the moment a society becomes adult, when it stops asking, is this allowed, and starts asking, should this live? One teaches the court to consult, the other teaches the forest to comply. One invents on the record, the other invents off the cliff. Listen for their distortions in yourself. Are you composing emails to avoid saying yes or no? Libra is tired. Make the call. Are you writing a private indictment in your head and calling it intuition? Scorpio needs air. Open a window. Are you prepared to forgive because new facts have balanced the scale? Libra at its best. Are you prepared to say no because someone crossed a line they swore they saw? Scorpio clean and calm. Their medicine is reciprocal. If you sting, weigh first. If you weigh, remember that some sums only balance when something ends. Let Antares warn you that anger is not strategy. Let Speaker remind you that verdicts feed people or they are theatre. Practice the art of the tie broken wisely. Practice the art of the strike withheld until it prevents 5 future strikes. Look up. The beam hangs level, a thin idea holding entire cities together. The scorpion sprawls near the Milky Way's brightest dust, tail lifted where good stories keep their unprintable truths. Between them you can feel the season change inside your own chest. Heat leaving performance, entering purpose. What follows is distance, an archer drawing a line across winter, and endurance, a sea-goat learning to climb while remembering it once swam. But let the scales and the sting have their long night. Judgment that feeds, boundaries that heal. Without those, no fire is safe and no harvest means anything. Winter stands up in the sky, shoulders squared, breath white. After verdict and boundary, the season asks for trajectory and endurance. An arrow that knows why it flies, a creature that remembers it once belonged to 2 worlds and uses both to climb. The archer lives near the river of stars, bow always drawn toward the scorpion's red heart. On clear nights you can see a kettle shape there. The old ones joked it was a traveller's teapot. Steam rising where the Milky Way thickens like breath in cold. That's Sagittarius's neighbourhood. Crossroads and way stations. Maps unrolled on saddle leather. Questions asked at campfires bright enough to push the dark back just far enough to keep talking. But the constellation is not only the wild band of centaurs that crashed weddings and made songs about it. There was one who stepped away from that noise, Chiron, the healer teacher with the wound that never quite closed. He taught aim that wasn't merely marksmanship, the art of choosing a target worthy of the string. He knew herbs by their real names and constellations by their work, and he taught those who would listen that distance is a kind of honesty. Then an accident. Poison flung in friendly chaos wrote pain into his days. Immortal, he could not die. Wise, he would not rage. Disciplined, he bargained with fate and stepped down from eternity so another might rise. The archer's light keeps that bargain in it. Freedom cut to shape by responsibility. Sagittarius, breathing true, is pilgrimage rather than escape. It packs light, shares fire, and aims blunt truth at swollen lies. It asks for stories and returns them with more miles on them, richer, truer. Its medicine is perspective. Climb the hill, look back, correct the map for everyone else. When it curdles, the same arrow turns sermon into shrapnel. Certainty overgrows curiosity. Quest becomes flight. Oaths thin under the weight of horizon hunger. The mouth says candour while the heart practices cruelty and calls it honesty. The shadow is crusade, virtue riding too fast to notice what it tramples. Remember too the other archer the poet sometimes placed here, Crotus, the applauder of the muses, a creature of woodpaths who invented applause so that excellence would not echo into silence. Even the sign's exuberance has civility in it when it's healthy. Celebrate, then study, laugh, then listen. Under the bough's tension is etiquette, a way of keeping the camp happy enough to go another day. Now let the arrow fly and follow it down to stone. Capricorn rises where the year is thinnest, a gate in the night the ancients called the doorway of gods. Its shape is strange on purpose, goat in the forequarters, Vish in the aft, a creature designed to remember both mountain and sea. Two origin stories braid under its stars. One is panic turned to survival. When upheaval roared up over the horizon, Typhon all coils and storm, the woodland god leapt for the Nile, meaning to vanish under safety. He transformed too quickly. The part still in water learned the tale's language, while the part still on land kept its hooves. The world took notes. The message, hybridize or be eaten. When the danger passed, that odd grace was set in the sky as a diagram for getting through any season that bites. Breathe water when stone fails. Find stone when currents try to carry you where you didn't choose. The other tale is lonelier and truer to Capricorn's bone. Prycus, the sea-goat who loved knowledge more than sleep, watched his kin pull themselves onto shingle and wander inland, losing language and memory with each step. He begged Kronos for reversals, time flung backward like a net, again and again, only to watch choice reassert itself like tide. In the end, he asked to be lifted out of the wound. The reward was a constellation and a job description. Witness without control, learn to build instead of rewind. Capricorn's daylight work is not glamorous. It is ledgers balanced, scaffolds checked, cold mornings on a ridge where frost bites through glove leather, and the only applause is the quiet click of a well-set anchor. It is founding not for bragging rights, but for shelter, institutions that outlast weather and temperament. At its best, this sign is stewardship that refuses corruption, ambition welded to usefulness, patience that treats time like capital to be invested in things that make others safer. It is the memory that every summit was once seafloor, humility that keeps the view from making you cruel. Its shadow is the tyranny of results, reputation mistaken for worth. A ladder built so high it forgets to be a bridge. The goat that climbs over faces instead of rocks and calls the bruises necessary. The fishtail that hoards what flows. In myths, Saturn, lord of this sign, once swallowed what threatened him, an imagined that made him safe. Capricorn must unlearn that reflex every hour. Do not consume what you fear. Build a place where fear has nothing to eat. There are kinder cautions too. Amalthea's tail runs along the ridge here. The goat whose milk kept a divine mouth from crying out the first winter, whose horn became the cornucopia, an image of plenty that is not theft but overflow. Plenty in Capricorn's hands is supposed to be distribution, not display. Saturnalia, the old winter feast, flipped power for a week, not to mock order but to remind it who it serves. The lesson lands the same way each year. Strength without reversal goes stale. Law without laughter breaks. Look up at the sign stars. Deneb Algedi, tale of the sea-goat, glints like a coin paid on time. Nashira, the bringer of good news, suggests that discipline has a soft voice if you listen. Dabi and Algidi mark horns that take no nonsense but do not gore without cause. The whole figure moves slowly, stubbornly, climbing the ecliptic, as if each degree were a rung you could trust. Placed after Libra's scales and Scorpio's sting, these two teach a deeper civics. First we measure, then we defend, now we aim, then we build. Sagittarius asks what horizon is worth the road. Capricorn answers with the road itself, graded, drained, maintained, so the next pilgrims don't have to reinvent gravel. One carries a philosophy, the other mortgages a winter to make that philosophy livable in March. Start hearing their voices in your own choices. If you're burning with a cause, ask the goatfish to audit your zeal. Does the plan survive weather? Who holds the keys? If you're counting coins in a lightless room and calling it prudence, borrow the archer's fire. What is the mountain for? Who gets the view? Work like Precus learned you must, forward only, but let Chiron's giving up of immortality inoculate your ambition. Some sacrifices buy time for others. Make those. Some only polish your nameplate. Skip those. Under them the world takes its winter shape. Crews on night shifts keep bridges from icing. Foremen pour a last slab before snowfall. Travellers read their breath for wind direction and keep going because stopping here kills. A handful of friends argues over a map and a kettle and decides where to try at first light. On a hill, a wall goes up straight. On a coast, a breakwater holds. Somewhere a document is drafted in plain language that will quietly outlive its author. The arrow hums, the hoof clicks, the tail steers, ahead waits a vessel that carries water like ideas, rebellion with a blueprint, and a pair of fishes that teach surrender and faith not as drift, but as navigation by feel. For tonight, let distance and discipline share your fire. Aim carefully, build honestly. The year bends here, and if you lay the stones right, it will bend toward shelter. The vessel appears just above the goat that built the road, a silhouette pouring light like a river. It is not a jar, not really. It is a decision, to keep the waters moving so they do not turn to fever. The ancients called him the water bearer, and meant three things at once: flood, invention, and the nerve to upend custom when the math says custom is killing people. One story says the pourer began as a stranger in a hillside pasture, too beautiful for safety. An eagle tore the sky and carried him upward, past oaths and outcry, to serve wine at the table where weather is decided. Ganymede, breathless, unwilling, then indispensable, learned who thirsts and when. He filled cups without flattery, steadied hands that shook after thunder, and tilted bowls when the world below begged for rain. Aquarius inherits his altitude and his danger. The view from above is clarifying and cold. You see patterns no one in the plaza can see. You also risk forgetting the plaza has a temperature. Another ancestry swells under the same stars. A story of water not parcelled but absolute. Smoke in the sky, shouts below, then a horizon becoming wall. A flood that erases continent and calendar. Two figures earn survival by remembering measure when nobody else does. Deucalion and Pyrrha, who refuse to rebuild with theft, who ask the earth what it will allow, who read an oracle's riddle, throw the bones of your mother, and understand it doesn't mean corpses, it means stones. They cast the future over their shoulders. People rise from rock. Civilization starts again with consent. Aquarius keeps that riddle in its pocket. Rebuild, but learn how. Go back even farther, beyond Greek, and you meet the same silhouette wearing other names. In the valley of two rivers, a god of fresh waters, Enki, Hei, pours life from a jar while showing mortals how to write contracts and dig canals. In Egypt, the bearers rising signalled the Nile's good trouble. Banks overtopped and promise spread in silt. Here, water is not romance, it is policy. You route it, or it outroutes you more. This is why Aquarius rebels with a blueprint. In its bright mode, it drafts aqueducts and open-source laws, invents city fountains and citizen juries, says all of us and means it, not as a slogan but as infrastructure. It loves the future enough to manufacture it. Lightning harnessed to glass filaments, voices carried without horses, vaccines in vials, a street where nobody sleeps because the design left no dark corners to hide hunger. Its miracles are municipal. The shadow looks heroic until you check the pulse of the room. Detachment parades as fairness. People become populations. Ganymede's abduction becomes a management style. The bearer pours without looking up to see who is drowning and who is being held under. Utopia is declared without sewer maps. Revolution tortures the granary and congratulates itself on purity while children, no, we promise not to name them, while stomachs argue the case that slogans cannot. Aquarius at its worst mistakes shock for progress and forgets that flow must be governed or it becomes a scouring. There are talismans to keep the sign from freezing into theory. One is the humble word aqueduct, a mountain's grief redirected into wheat. Another is Saturn, Capricorn's old ruler, who also claims Aquarius, form around freedom, rails under speed. The third is the smaller myth braided into Ganymede's larger one. When Zeus paid the boy's family, he paid in immortal horses. Compensation is not romance, it is policy written as atonement. Aquarius matures when it learns to pair vision with repair. Listen for this sign when a city decides to count everyone, not just voters. Hear it when a festival becomes a commons instead of a billboard. Feel it when a friend looks you in the eye and says, "We can change this," and hands you a plan with boring sections you can actually implement. The water pours, the level rises, the fever breaks. Below the pourer, two small shapes flick their tails where the river of stars bends. Pisces, a twin sign that remembers how to stay together when the air turns to knives. Their story begins in panic and ends as a promise. A roar rolled over the horizon. Typhon, mountain tall, coil thick, a godquake. On the riverbank, a goddess of love and her companion scanned the water for a way out. They did not fly, they jumped. Scales where there had been skin. A cord knotted to keep them from losing each other in the churn. They slipped under the violence and swam into a night the storm could not breathe. Other tellings keep the river but change the faces. In Syria they said a goddess fell for a mortal and, ashamed, turned fish to forget. Priests of her temple refused to eat what had saved their deity, and a province learned reverence disguised as taboo. Along the Euphrates, they said a fish found an egg and rolled it to shore. Doves broke it open, and Aphrodite climbed out of foam, the river applauding on both banks. Whether as rescue or origin, the symbol repeats. Small mercies overpower large bragging. This is Pisces' work, dissolve what must dissolve, bind what must be bound. In its tender light, compassion is not performance, it is navigation. The cord between the fishes is not a leash, it is a lifeline. They move as one when the current snatches. They split the stream and meet again downstream. Pisces is the art of not getting separated, the discipline of soul-level cordage. Faith as practice rather than pose. It rules endings on purpose. The last sign does not build, it absolves. It takes the bucket Aquarius manufactured and uses it for blessings. It visits the sick at hours others avoid. It sings in rooms where speech shatters. It looks at law and mercy and chooses the third thing, grace. It keeps the door ajar for late arrivals and refuses to publish their lateness. If a crime can be healed, it will heal it. If it cannot, it will bury it without spectacle and feed the ground with whatever lesson can be rescued. But the shadow is thick fog. Boundaries blur until harm slips through in a cassock. Martyrdom becomes a paragraph people love to quote while the martyrs starve. The cord that saved the pair becomes a net for enabling. Pity replaces respect. Lies are tolerated because they rhyme with hope. Pisces at its worst confuses surrender with collapse and calls every undertow a current. There are counters within the myth itself. The fishes tied themselves. Nobody tied them. Choice, not drift. When the danger passed, they did not stay fish. Return is part of the ritual. And the river matters. It is not the ocean's blank. It is a road with banks. Compassion without banks floods. So Pisces learns to pour back into the jar what isn't needed tonight, and to keep a ledger even for love, what restores, what dissolves, what justifies paranoia, and what demands a song. Across the sky, allies help keep the line. Delphinus, the dolphin, leaps near Aquarius, remembering a singer named Arion who, facing knives at sea, talked a cetacean into rescue with a lyre. Poseidon smiled. Mercy wore a fin. Art brought a life. Just beyond, Pegasus stamps a spring from rock so muses can drink. Inspiration becomes water you can actually carry. The heavens keep hinting flow, rescue, song. These three braided make a culture that outlasts tempests. Aquarius and Pisces together. Close the circle you have been walking since the ram said, "Run." First the blueprint to serve the many, then the mercy that picks up anyone the blueprint missed. First the system that moves resources like rain, then the vow that no one will drown because we are tired. The air sign says, all. The water sign answers, each. Between them, a civilization. Find them in yourself. When you're drafting a charter, invite the part of you that cries at small commercials to sit at the table and veto any sentence that forgets a person. When you are forgiving, ask the engineer in you to check the gate and the downstream village. Pour and measure. Dissolve and return. Tie the cord and untie it later, deliberately, with thanks. Above, the water-bearer tips his jar in a glittering line that empties exactly where the twin fishes swim. In old star maps, the stream runs straight into the mouth of one fish, a promise that what we design will feed what we love. The year is about to roll over into itself, back to the ram that rescues and the bull that builds, but the sky lingers here longer than you think. Because every cycle's worth depends on these last two motions, remake the world and then forgive it. River, then tide, law, then lullaby. Down here, the season fits the story. The cold snaps, ice softens, gutters sing. A city crew opens hydrants to flush the mains. A volunteer hooks hoses to a cistern and fills barrels for neighbours who couldn't get out. A nurse writes one more name on a board and circles back to erase 3 because the fever broke. In a chapel with poor heating, someone hums until the prayer finds its key. In a lab, a researcher with dry hands and chapped lips recalibrates a pump and sends clean water into a sample. On a pier, 2 silhouettes knot a rope between them before stepping into a skiff. The jar pours, the cord holds. Winter lets go. Look up one more time. The bearer's arm will tire. The fishes will slip out of sight. Dawn will just make the constellations into memory. But the work they wrote into the dark remains. Build for all. Forgive for each. If you can keep those 2 imperatives in your pocket, the rest of the year will be blessed by engineering and redeemed by mercy. And the river that runs through every story, your story, will reach the sea without losing anyone it promised to carry. Night loosens. The great wheel stops pretending it's just decoration. You've walked the rim, sign by sign, and learned that every light is a verdict with a remedy hidden in its shadow. For the last stretch, let the sky pull you through the whole circle in one tide. 12 thresholds, 12 verbs, one story about how to live without lying to yourself. Begin again at the cut in spring where breath becomes decision. Aries is red star Hamal, and the memory of a blade that paused because a ram said no. The rescue was real. The aftermath was rough. The fleece became a prize, A city made a maze to justify a bull's courtesy gone rotten. Taurus glows with Aldebaran, the eye that watched ashore become a throne and a problem. Possession turned into appetite until the thread and a steady hand proved smarter than stone. Gemini flashes with Pollux and Castor, two sons for one idea. Share what you have, even time. One brother asked the sky to make equality real, and learned it means alternating with absence. Cancer is dim until you know where to look, the beehive a small cloud praesepe, where the caring gather, and two faint stars called the donkeys, a Celis borealis and australis, that suggest ordinary labour. The crab's heroism was not victory, it was showing up and getting stepped on. Hera put that in the sky so we'd stop grading devotion by applause. Leo sprawls, crowned by Regulus, heart steady as a drum. The pelt shines because a wrist chose pressure over performance. Authority that refuses intimacy is just raw. Intimacy that refuses authority is a cuddle with teeth. Virgo carries Spica like a receipt that says bread is the point of law. She left the courts when spectacle replaced measure. She returns every time a ledger saves a life quietly. Libra hangs its twin pans, Zubenel Genubi and Zubeneshamali, the southern and northern claws in older maps, still catching light from a story where punishment became procedure and rage learned a desk job with dignity. Justice that feeds, not theatre that starves. Then the red coal, Antares, pulses where Scorpio keeps the night accountable. Orion sets as the Scorpion rises. That's not poetry, it's policy. Boundaries aren't suggestions, they are first aid. Sting used right is surgery, used wrong, it's addiction to control. Sagittarius leans back on its bow, Caus Australis bright on the string, and asks whether your target deserves the muscle. Charon's bargain, give up what you cannot bear so another may live, make zeal humble enough to learn. Capricorn levers itself up ledges with Deneb Al-Gadi flickering at the tail. Remember the sea you came from while you plant bolts in rock. Precus failed to reverse time, so he built instead. Steady is not boring, steady is merciful. Aquarius tips jars named Sadal Melik and Sadal Sud. Luck of the king, luck of the lucky, because luck is often logistics. Ganymede's altitude can freeze empathy. Deucalion's stones can rebuild without blood. Design for all or watch water take its own path. Finally, Alresha knots Pisces together at the riverbend the cord star, reminding you that mercy has banks. Two fishes slip under Typhon not to hide but to survive without losing each other. Dissolve what hurts, keep what holds, return to land when the raw spends itself. That's the table of contents. The dark parts were not there to shock you, they were there to recruit you. Every sign carries a cut. Sacrifice that almost happened, abduction that became dynasty, equality that costs alternation, service that gets crushed, glory stitched from something that tried to eat you, standards turned brittle, fairness used as delay, protection turned to siege, honesty curdled into cruelty, leadership calcified into ladders, progress detached from people, compassion dissolved into fog. The medicine is concise and hard, drop the knife, don't make a maze, share days, guard the hearth without building a prison, win once, then work, proofread the dream, vote, then choose, protect without possession, aim beyond your ego, build for others, blueprint with payroll, forgive with gates, watch how the heavens themselves enforce these edits. When the Scorpion rises, the braggart hunter disappears. Hubris is seasonal, cure included. When the scales lift, Spica sits near the fulcrum to whisper that verdicts that ignore bread are jokes. When the archer's arrow points toward Antares, the message is not kill. It's aim your courage at the exact wound, not the whole body. When the sea-goat climbs, it drags the river with it. hybrid vigour against binary thinking. When the water-bearer pours, the stream lines straight to one fish's mouth. Systems should feed actual beings, and when the fishes tighten their cord, they knot the cycle shut so the ram can break it again on purpose. A wheel is only moral if there's a way off it. Listen to older rooms echo the same pattern. In the Bull Age, cultures carved cattle into stone because staying fed felt like the god. In the Ram Age, spears and altars learned each other's schedules. In the Fish Age, symbols swam on walls to mark a brotherhood of forgiveness no empire could tax. The Water-bearer Age arrives not as a prophecy you can trade, but as plumbing, voting and networks that make the sentence "we" honest. The precessing pole doesn't ask your belief, it asks your budget. Build aqueducts of law and compassion or drown in rhetoric. This isn't fortune-telling, it's memory work. The sky doesn't command, it reminds. Babylonians named these asterisms to count years and ration flood. Greeks dressed them in stories so law could feel like music. Romans stamped them on coins to pretend virtue had been minted. Monks copied the stories inside walls that were cold on purpose so language would outlast siege. Cartographers pinned these shapes to 16th century atlases because sailors needed a grammar at night. None of that says your day is fated by Jupiter's longitude. All of it says your species kept instructions where the weather couldn't burn them. So here is a field guide for waking hours, distilled to the verbs your ceiling keeps repeating. Aries, interrupt. When a ritual is about to eat someone, be the golden noise. Say first, explain later, admit the cost, refuse to turn the rescue into a trophy. Taurus, steward. Keep comfort from becoming captivity. Feed the pantry, cut a door into the back of the vault. If you must build a maze, build it as a museum, not a mouth. Gemini, bridge. Trade eyes when judgment hardens. Tell the story back to me until it fits my face. Alternate without resentment. Make absence a promise kept, not a punishment. Cancer, keep. Guard warmth from weather and from the kinds of people who bring their own. Do the work nobody sees and refuse the martyr's costume. Pinch only when the line is crossed and then let go. Leo, reveal. Stand where fear wants silence and make the room brighter without making it smaller. Wear your victories like tools, not crowns. Retire applause before it retires you. Virgo, repair. Honour the rule that prevents harm, not the ritual that polishes ego. Put the comma where life needs air. When you can't save everything, save the sequence that saves the most. Libra, weigh. Call in witnesses and listen like a builder. Break ties toward life. Invite the Furies to change jobs when rage has done enough. Put bread on the balance. If the reading ignores it, start over. Scorpio, enforce. Draw the line, not the drama. Use the sting as medicine. One dose, clean needle, clear reason. Burn the ledger after justice, never before. Sagittarius, aim. Walk until your certainty blisters and then keep only what healed. Toast what's excellent, question what's merely loud. Share maps, leave room for detours you didn't imagine. Capricorn, build, choose stone that will still like you in 50 winters. Refuse ladders that don't convert to ladders for others. Translate legacy into access. Aquarius, distribute, turn ideals into plumbing. Count everyone, design out cruelty. Compensate when the eagle steals, let Saturn put rails under your lightning. Pisces, absolve. Let what must end without spectacle. Keep the cord between what matters, make room for return and insist on it. Forgiveness is not amnesia, it's architecture for tomorrow. Threaded through all the 12 is a quieter instruction. Handle power like borrowed fire. Prometheus burned for handing it over. The lesson isn't don't share, it's share with skill and accept the bill. The same with love. Aphrodite's waves and Europa's ride became regimes and rituals. The correction wasn't abstinence. It was Ariadne's line, desire with orientation. Starlore keeps backing you up with specifics if you want them. When Hamal stands high at dusk, ask what knife you need to stop. When Aldebaran blinks like a furnace eye, audit what you own. When Pollux is brighter than Castor, give the mortal half of your promises extra time. When Praesepe looks like a smudge, remember kitchens run civilizations. When Regulus is due south, deliver your speech and be done. When Spiker rises, file the paperwork that will keep someone fed next winter. When Zubanesh Amali steadies, schedule the vote. When Antares throbs, postpone the text you wrote out of heat. When Caus Australis clears the trees, choose the worthy target over the tempting one. When Deneb al-Ghedi peaks, reconcile the accounts. When Sad al-Melik rules the meridian, publish the plan. When Al-Resha is visible in crisp air, tie the knot you keep pretending will tie itself. You've noticed by now that the messed up parts were doors, not dungeons. The cruelty of the old stories isn't there to numb you, it's there to inoculate you. Sacrifice etiologies teach refusal, abduction tales teach consent, vendetta epics invent juries, monster hunts invent humility, floods invent codes. Each constellation is a scar that learned to guide a hand. You don't have to believe in omens to accept that a civilization stores its ethics where time can't tear the page. Walk once more around the room in your mind, slowly, as if tracing a seal into wax. A ram lowers its head against a knife. A bull breathes sea salt and steadies your pantry. Two brothers trade places without complaint. A crab patrols the shallow edge where moonlight breaks. A lion sprawls, pelt a lesson in hard-won calm. A maiden holds grain like a verdict. A beam hangs level over a square where voices learn to take turns. A scorpion lifts its tail and draws a neat border. An archer sights past rage toward what actually needs healing. A sea-goat clamps hooves in frost and keeps climbing. A pourer tips a jar until fever recedes. Two fishes tighten a cord and vanish beneath a roar that would like to be forever and never is. Down here the day continues. Bridges don't ice, courts open, workshops hum. A planner gets an email right the first time. A meeting ends early because the point was made without theatre. A lab tech labels a sample, catches an error, and corrects a chain of custody that will keep a verdict honest. A neighbour with a wrench fixes a leak in a hallway that isn't theirs. A singer in an empty room finds the key that will make strangers kinder for 4 minutes tomorrow. You cannot see the constellations at noon, but their verbs run under everything like groundwater. You wanted a lullaby, the Zodiac gave you an ethic. That's better. The mind sleeps when it trusts itself to wake. If you need a last image, take, say, the River of Stars, Milky Way, arching from Scorpion's sting to Gemini's twin heads, a white road connecting consequence to conversation. Somewhere along it, a faint knot, Alrestia, holds two currents together. Somewhere else, a bright spiker, keeps grain attached to lore. Farther on, a coal, Antares, reminds courage to be precise. Above all that, the bearers of weather sit at a table and pour with more care than legend admits. Breathe out. You have the verbs rescue, steward bridge, keep, reveal, repair, weigh, enforce, aim, build, distribute, absolve. The wheel will turn whether you watch it or not. The watching makes you gentle, and the gentleness makes you strong. Let the ceiling go dark. The case files can close for tonight. The stars will keep the minutes.